Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Masculine Mastery, the show where we talk about things that matter to men. I'm your host, Dr. Asif, and today we've got a guest all the way from New York, Harlem, New York, and in the States, Isaiah McCall, who is a author, a blogger, content creator, ultra-marathoner, ex-military, I believe, stand-up comedian, and just general Renaissance man, really. Who I've been following for a while now. He's put up content regarding men's empowerment and one particular article on the weakness of men, particularly in light of what Jordan Peterson said regarding the man-child complex. So, Isaiah, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Doing well. Glad to be here.
How's the weather in New York?
I'd say New York's the perfect time to be here in the fall, actually. But it's a quick transition to winter. Once that happens, nobody wants to be here.
Yes, because I know from the UK, it's quite cheap flights to New York in February. They're cheap, but New York is freezing in February, so not a lot can go.
Yeah, don't come here in January or February. Stay away.
Yes, yeah. I think I'll certainly come sometime in the summer. How have you been? How's COVID been for you? Because I know you work predominantly on Medium. You've got your own blog there. You've got your own website. You've written a couple of books, and you've contributed to various platforms. So, was your work before COVID remote, and it's remained remote, or have you had a massive change in the last 2 years since the pandemic started?
Yeah, I always tell people I was working remote before COVID, and it was the cool thing to do at that point. But then once COVID hit, everybody was working remote, and I felt as though that privilege was yanked away. Now everyone, it's not even a cool thing to do. In New York, I believe it's only 20% of people are working full time at this point, and in the office. Most people are working remote to some regard. So. Yeah, it's been a crazy COVID roller coaster. I think people have kind of forgot it all. They've kind of blocked it out because in New York, maybe only a year ago, we were using vaccine passports to get into bars, to get in any place. So there should be a lot of things that people have to digest. But at this point, we're at least back to somewhat normalcy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine it must be quite. Weird seeing Manhattan not as busy with people, because if there's only 20% of people working in the office, that means 80% of the workforce must be from home. So the usual hustle and bustle must be much quieter.
Yeah, we're definitely living in a post-pandemic economy. I hear a lot of people say we're not going back to the way things are. There's going to be people working at home in some regard at this point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I followed your work for a while now on Twitter, LinkedIn, Medium, etc. And I just reached out to you recently on Instagram. You wear many hats in the field of content creation and blogging, and like I say, you've authored 2 books. But I just couldn't really put my finger on how to describe you, because you write about cryptocurrency, you write about fitness, you write about masculinity, you write about feminism, you write about race, inequality, COVID. You even write about that. So, where did all these plethora of kind of strings to your bow, where did that come from?
Oof. Well, both my parents are teachers, so education's always been important in my world. Even though I would say more precisely, it's the term being an autodidact, so being a self-taught person. Yeah. That's more applied to me, and I think a lot of people have that nowadays with podcasts, like yours. Or audiobooks. There's so many avenues of learning nowadays that I think it speaks to people like me that can receive it. So I think there's a lot of people out there. And as long as you put the time in, you read, you dive into podcasts, you'll find that there's a lot of things to engage in and to talk about, especially in this crazy, chaotic world we live in now.
Yeah, absolutely. Things are available online which weren't available 50 years ago. And the sheer exponential growth of knowledge is scary. And I think there's the kind of 2 words we use, multi-hyphenate and, multi-hyphenate or polypotentialite, someone who has many hyphens. And I think certainly you are one of them, because I was reading your crazy journey into an ultra marathoner and fitness and your blogs around fitness. How important is fitness to you? And certainly now, when you work remotely, how important has fitness been, and how important is it now, particularly in a post-pandemic world?
Extremely important. I believe it's the bedrock, especially of men. My sister also, I have two sisters. They're both very physically active, but for men especially, I believe it's the bedrock to at least challenge yourself every day. After this podcast, I actually have to go get my workout in for sure. But I think it all starts with just a perception of yourself, So if you look at yourself and you're leaving something on the table, you're not really able to. I can't even do a podcast or write if I don't feel like I'm in the right kind of body. So I know it's tough. It's very tough, especially during the pandemic, to get out there and do something. But I'm a firm believer in someone like David Goggins, the Navy SEAL, who, even if you can't get to the gym, at least try to get a few push-ups in the day, try to get a run, just try something. Even Eleanor Roosevelt had a saying where it was do something that scares the pants off you every day. So I think fitness is one of those.
Yeah, I think that's a great statement. You said, leave nothing off the table, bring everything to the table. And you see, and the whole premise of my podcast series is masculine mastery, how men can attain mastery. And you can't attain mastery, intellectual mastery, emotional, psychological, spiritual mastery without physical mastery. So you see guys who are very, very smart, high IQs, but terribly out of shape, out of breath when they walk the stairs. And the other spectrum is you see guys who are very, very fit, physically fit, wrestling pulse rate of 40, can bench 200, but don't read, don't write, don't meditate, don't reflect.
Yeah.
So you've got the two extremes here. And a big part of self-actualization, if you look at Da Vinci's perfect man, the Vitruvian man, was a man who was well-read, well-proportioned, well-sculpted, and wore many hats. And that's the whole Renaissance period that we had in Europe, where men did many, many things. And nowadays, men are just doing one or the other, or in many cases, doing neither. Just being 3 out of 10, being 3 out of 10 physically and mentally and emotionally. And because if you read the Stoics of Sparta and Athens and Rome, they were gladiators on the field, but they were philosophers when they went back in the morning. So it's having that well-rounded. So do you think your physical health sharpens you mentally?
Yeah, I would say so. While you're speaking there, I couldn't help but think about Plato and a lot of the other Greeks. Plato was a wrestler, famously. And when you read the Odyssey by Homer, or the Iliad more specifically, they have competitions. They're doing amazing physical feats, but these are all very intelligent men. So I get it now. I follow a few of the comedians I follow who I think are some very intelligent people. They like to say, when you're working out, you don't have time to think. You don't have time to sit down. How do you get time to watch the documentaries and the podcasts? But I do, and I get that, but I do believe that pushing yourself to this higher point of, like you said, an erudite Renaissance man is taking that physical and meeting it with the intelligentsia. Someone like Joe Rogan, who I don't think he's the smartest guy on the planet, but I think we all drawn to him because he's able to connect two different worlds together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the apex example of that is I always go to the Klitschko brothers, who are heavyweight champion boxers, Ukrainian born, raised in Germany, and one of them is based in the States now. Both got PhDs and both supreme athletes. And I think that is a rarity now where someone excels in academia and in athletics. Because we from a young age, we dichotomize children into sporty or studious. And that's a very, very damaging dichotomy. It shouldn't be boundary like that. They should combine, and they should really, really, what's the word? It should be symbiotic. You mentioned something about Plato and Homer, Plato's Republic, Homer's Odyssey, and the Iliad. How important is philosophy, particularly kind of Greek philosophy to you in your journey of self-actualization and actually becoming the best version of yourself?
I think it's the most important thing, actually. And I get it's hard. It's almost like completely different eras. It's almost like reading Shakespeare. It's like, how does this apply to me? How does this make any sense? But these stories are so fundamental and so archetypal that they can teach you a lot about life. And Plato specifically, I know there's a saying where people say just start with the Greeks because they've talked about so much. Plato influenced The Matrix, which is a movie that goes around and has so much to say about today's day and age. But if you go read his cave allegory, or even go read The Republic, you'll find what he had to say about politics. So I do believe people should have some kind of understanding of Greek philosophy. And a lot of, I'd even go further, I'd say classics in general. So even that goes to American classics that came out in the 20th century, or that goes to reading Shakespeare. When you get this base knowledge, it's almost like building up the trunk of your tree, and you're able to grow better branches, I would say, out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the adage is readers are leaders, and men that don't read can't lead. And it's so important because when someone explained to me as a child that, I said, when you're reading, you're having a conversation with this person passed away 200 years ago, but you're having a conversation with him or her about their best work. And you're having a 1 week conversation, 2 weeks conversation with them, which is 30 years, which is a cumulative effort of 30 years of their best work. And you're reading that in a week or 2 weeks. Now that's
amazing,
privilege.
Yes.
And we only look further by standing on the shoulders of giants. You mentioned Greek the philosophers, the great Plato, the pioneers of pedagogy, not just kind of political science, but pedagogy, teaching, the ability to teach and ability to impart knowledge in a sophisticated way, because Plato, disciples, Socrates, Aristotle, these guys are very good teachers. The other side of that, Isaiah, is Greek mythology. So we've got the stories of Zeus, Hercules, we've got the story of Narcissus, and so many really touching stories. The one I wanted to mention, which because it came in your article, was the story of Oedipus, the man who
yes.
The man who murdered his father and then had intercourse with his mother, and the Oedipus complex, which then Freud talks about in analytical psychology. And you made a really nice juxtaposition there with Jordan Peterson's man-child and Freudian psychology, Freudian and Jungian psychology. And I think that was a very nice intersection from an intellectual point of view, how you married them up in a contemporary, setting of today's man-child. Because Freud didn't know about feminism, because feminism is pretty new, it's 50 years, relatively recent movement. So Freud mentioned the Oedipus complex, but now in the context of feminism and independent women, strong women, we're creating this gulf now where women are getting stronger, which is good. You mentioned as well, equality is great, it's good for the economy, but we're getting increasingly weaker men. Can you expand on that article? Because I love to know more. I love to kind of pick your brains about what made you write that piece.
Yeah, sure. So from what I understand of Freud is that he believed the Oedipus complex was the archetype that described, it was like the highest archetype that could describe most of the world. And I believe, I don't know if I believe that's true entirely, but I definitely believe it is one of the strongest ones. It's the one that's happening right now. And I believe the best documentary you could watch on that, and I got this recommended from Jordan Peterson, is a documentary called Crumb, which I recommend everybody watches. And it is about a comic book artist, and he has two brothers that their mother was overbearing. And if you don't have a mother that lets your sons go free, you either have sons that are attached to the mother, don't know how to live. In many ways, it's almost like the Christ narrative where the mother says you had to let your son get sacrificed. And in that documentary, particularly, one of the sons ended up killing himself after the documentary. Another one was a homeless man. So I do think it's a very tough time, and a lot of what you said, I think applies, that women have gotten so much higher, and it puts a lot more of a burden on men, not in a bad way, but I think, the old saying is hard times create weak men, and weak men, or if you look up the saying, it's one of those perfect archetypal sayings where it's hard times are creating these hard times will create stronger men, but we have, I would say, weak men, and that's the problem now. And I do believe that overcoming that Oedipal complex, and it isn't what Freud, I know a lot of people like to cheapen him in that way and say, oh, you're just saying, have sex. It isn't, it's almost metaphorical in the way where it's like, you're not getting past, you're a man child, you're staying at home, you're not challenging yourself, you're not working out, you're not doing many of the things that can better yourself. So you might as well just be, this man child and stay around your mother. So I do believe that people need to realize the importance of that, of the Oedipal complex, and realize it's not so much a literal thing, and it's more of a metaphorical thing.
Yeah. So I think with that, it's the quote you said, hard times create strong men. So
yes,
I think now we're living in good times. As in, I saw one of the graphs on your post in terms of GDP per capita and the growth of the population of the world since in the last few hundred years, since the 18th century. So relative, per GDP, crime rate, etc., life expectancy. Because I'm a medical doctor by training, and certainly in the last 100 years, infection rates have gone down, maternal mortality has gone, polio has been eradicated, smallpox has been eradicated. So many medical advances. So objectively, we are living in much better times, and these good times create weaker men, and it's a whole cycle, generational cycle of strong times create strong men, and then them strong men create good times, and these good times which we're living in now, and we have been living in for the last 30, 40 years, since NASA landed on the moon. It's been relatively good. So yes, we've had one depression in the 80s and a second one after 2008 and then COVID, but relatively last 50 years, Isaiah, we live better lives than our parents. So there are good times, and I think these good times create unnecessary comfort. And this comfort, this lack of conflict, lack of conquest, is creating these weak men. And you're seeing, Pornhub and PlayStations and just men, just out of shape and just financially out of shape, physically out of shape, mentally out of shape, etc. So, in your experience, what can men do to really push out the comfort, apart from physical activities? How else can they push themselves to really escape this comfort zone which has been created by good times?
I would recommend, the whole time you were talking about that, I was thinking of the movie Fight Club, which I will admit does maybe make the problem very simple. But I believe there's a quote in that book run by, what the movie's based on the book, by Chuck Palahniuk, which is our Great Depression is our lives. Because, you have men going into the office every day. They have no kind of drive. Their libido's down. And I do believe that men almost need to, that's the craziest part, is you need to create conflict for yourself. And I think that's the hardest part. And it's the hardest part for me. I'm sure it's the hardest part for any man that has to keep himself accountable nowadays, is there is no war. There is no, I was going to say no pandemic, but there's no kind of drastic problem that requires you to go to a battlefield. And you need to create this battlefield for yourself almost every single day and get after it every single day. Something that these Navy SEALs like Jocko Willink and David Goggins preach. But I'd recommend watching that movie Fight Club and seeing how much of that world applies to yourself. And I think you can go from there. Yeah,
it's a great film, and the whole Tyler Durden kind of caricature, it's very fitting, and it goes back to the if you look at his job, he had an office job, and then Fight Club came about, and that alter ego almost is man's conquest for purpose. Man is not fulfilled by office drudgery. It's another form of serfdom. And talking of serfdom and financial kind of slavery and financial freedom, you write a lot in cryptocurrency.
Yes.
And it's, November was a good month, December was okay, and since January it's not been the best. We kind of 10 months into a world recession of oil and gas and stock markets, but also cryptocurrency has taken a real big beating. So in terms of financial literacy, Isaiah, what compelled you to have a deep dive into cryptocurrency?
In today's day and age, I mean, this is always how it's been. I believe fitness and financial literacy and philosophy are almost like three pillars of a man's worldview. So finance was just a natural extension. I didn't even start off that way. I started off writing about fitness. If you look at my earlier articles and my earlier work, I worked as a journalist for a while, so I wasn't even covering finance. And finance, I just started to realize was, wow, this is kind of part of your epistemology and more so your philosophy too. So it's something that I think every single person needs to learn if you want to break the chains of your slavery. And crypto is a natural extension of breaking the chains for that, I would say. I don't think it's perfect. I have a lot of people that push back on me all the time saying this is like privatized money. How am I going to explain to my mother and my grandpa, you need to go on Coinbase and you need to do this, you need to go through a decentralized exchange. And so it's a lot of things that maybe only a lot of us can understand now, but I do believe it's the best option out there is to have a place where you get to own your own bank, you get to own your own exchange. And it isn't perfect. But I do recommend that every man starts by trying to financially educate himself to the best of his ability. And I'm trying to think of the best book. The best book for cryptocurrency, I would say, is a book called 21 Lessons for Falling Down the Bitcoin Rabbit Hole. And for larger financial literacy, trying to think. It's a really hard adventure. That's why it's funny because everyone is trying to push you. A lot of financial people will tell you they're trying to obfuscate these terms and make them more complicated than they should be. And it really is simple, but it is hard to get on that path. So that's the one book I'll recommend for now.
Yeah. So there's I've not come across that book, but there's certainly a book I read last year called The Bitcoin Standard.
For a great book too.
Economists based in the States now. I think it's from Lebanon originally. And that's brilliant. Because like Marcus Garvey said, a man without knowledge of his past is like a tree without roots. And this is man, you can see as collective as a human race. And that book, The Bitcoin Standard, talks you through the history of humanity in terms of ledger, in terms of transactions, in terms of tender, and how things would exchange. And now it's only natural progression. Now, this is not financial advice, as I'm sure you'll say, but it's only natural progression that things will get decentralized. And,
yes.
Decentralized finance, even now, I've probably not seen a note for many months. Like, recently our Queen died in the UK. Our notes are changing anyway. Our notes will now have the king on. But I've not actually seen a note for a long time. Everything is electronic. It's all numbers on a spreadsheet. It's all, algorithm, back-end code-based numbers, which banks run on. So it's only natural that, decentralized financial systems take some share of the market going forward. And countries like El Salvador, they've adopted Bitcoin as an alternative ledger. What do you think going forward, particularly in some of the developing countries, how financially viable is it to develop, to actually use non-US dollar based currencies as a legal ledger?
I think it's going to happen everywhere to some extent. And it's not to say that there will be a Bitcoin standard, though I do believe Bitcoin will play a huge role. But this week I wrote about about BRICS, which is is Brazil, Russia, India, and a few other countries. And it's about their currency that they're creating. So I do think and China has their own digital yuan. So I do believe we're in the era of competing currencies, and Bitcoin will be one of them.
Yeah. So the BRIC and the Mint countries, they're always kind of touted as examples of countries which are on the verge of becoming first world. And it's interesting because, in terms of financial markets, stock prices, you've seen big drops in Apple. Some stocks are still holding up, but you've seen big drops in like Netflix, etc., etc. And S&P 500 and 250 have taken a bit of a hit recently as well. So the whole financial markets are going, I wouldn't say bearish, but certainly plateaued a bit this year. And that again goes, to the concept of discipline, and that's so important as a man. Having discipline with your diet, having discipline with your urges, having discipline with, just any kind of decadence, really. And financial literacy is based on due diligence and discipline. I think they're the two key ingredients. You've got to know your stuff, you've got to research, and then you have to be disciplined, because you saw a lot of guys taking money out.
Yes.
Money out.
Yeah, it's austerity. It's Austrian economics. That's what Bitcoin's based on, is at least having some principles to your finance instead of, because I believe the whole reason you should at least look at Bitcoin is you just have to understand the US dollar. And to do that, you just, have to read these books that we're recommending, because the US dollar is essentially the opposite of Austrian economics. It's a policy of, well, we'll be able to make it up on the fly, and we're able to do, and that's why a lot of these countries are going off the dollar, and it's something you desperately need to look into. I'd recommend to any person who's listening to this is that, currency debasement is real. It's the problem why we're here, and look into it, and look into Bitcoin, and look into alternative means of, investing or in finance.
Yeah. And you have to be ahead of the curve as men, particularly as men, because we still form a large part of the majority of the workforce in many countries. You have to be ahead of the curve. You have to be not reactive. You have to be responsive, responsible, and proactive. And even now, I've got so many friends who haven't invested in cryptocurrency. They actually haven't even invested in any form of stock market or any shares or index investments at all. They are still just living paycheck to paycheck, and I think that's symptomatic of a society which drip feeds people a salary, and it just kind of keeps them. It's very Marxist. Marx talked about this. Marx and Weber, they both talked about this, about how a salary is like an opium. It's a real big opium. People get addicted to a salary, and they never break out. And I hate using this term, the red pill and the blue pill, because it's got bad connotations, but I don't want to be sensitive. This whole matrix thing, escaping the matrix. That is the matrix. The financial system of salary jobs, tenured jobs, serfdom, servitude, employer-employee. Marx called it the bourgeoisie and the proletariat.
Yep.
The working class and the working class and the upper class. The kind of two distinctions. And it's still apparent now, especially in America. You've got vast swathes of land. You've got counties and states, Detroit, Michigan, which were reliant on industry in the 70s. And when that collapsed, you saw so much unemployment. And these are the states where financial literacy is most important. So, you mentioned Bitcoin and kind of cryptocurrency. I see you're big on Ethereum, you're big on Polygon. Why them two?
Ethereum mostly. I think there's a few great things going for it. Bitcoin decentralizes money and stores of value, and Ethereum is looking to decentralize, which to clear up that word is take out the middleman and hand the property to the community. So essentially, if you look at something like Uber, Ethereum is, if you created an application on Ethereum, think of it like the internet, you'd be able to have Uber in the hands. The lion's share of the investment would go to the people that use the app. If we're using the Uber example, it could be the drivers, it could be anybody else. So Ethereum is trying to invert the system that we're looking at now. And I know maybe that could probably scare some people off as into, well, we like to reward capitalists. We like to reward people with the ideas first. And it's not I would say the end game for Ethereum. It's mostly just to take out the authoritarian and Orwellian kind of presence that we have right now on the internet. So, you have a place like Facebook and Twitter, but there's no say amongst the users to how it's run. And I believe that Ethereum, if its proposition ends up being true, then that will be, it won't take over completely, but I do believe it will have some kind of market share where people will have this other alternative. And I don't think a lot of people accuse me that this is a libertarian wet dream, or this is, someone used the word Pollyanna-ish to describe it the other day, but it's something that, it's an optimistic sort of technology, and there's a lot of support for it now with a lot of great minds. So it's another thing that, no financial advice, but it's another thing like Bitcoin that I believe people should look into.
Yeah. So I think, have you seen the movie Viva Vendetta?
Yes, a long time ago, but I loved it. It definitely was one of my favorites when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's a great film. Stephen Fry's in it, English actor, really good film. I really enjoyed it. I think Hugo Weaving plays the great film. But again, just show some of the darker sides. You mentioned I think that's a really nice snippet to take away. Fitness, financial education, and philosophy. And I think that really encapsulates what a modern man should be like. But in all honesty, I could count on one hand how many men I know that tick them boxes. They either do one or the other, or most of the time, they don't do they don't do either. The average in all three. And I think if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's love, shelter, etc. At the apex of the hierarchy is self-actualization. And self-actualization means multi-domain mastery. You can't actually self-actualize if you are lacking, if you're out of shape, you don't know how good your body is. Therefore, you're not, by definition, self-actualize your physique. You're not self-actualize your physical capability. So you can't say you're self-actualized without being in the best physical shape, without being financially healthy and literate, and without being well-rounded and well-read, and standing on the shoulders of giants. So the question really, Isaiah, is bringing them three together. What advice would you say for men who don't tick any of them boxes? Where to start? Where to start in all three? Do you think one is more important and then the other ones follow, or do you have to start in small steps in all three?
I really do believe, it's a great question, because I really do believe it's starting anywhere and starting it messy and sloppily and just starting at any point. I think over the weekend, or maybe last week, Jordan Peterson had a podcast with Mohammed Hijab, who is a very prominent Islamic figure and philosopher. And he confronted him. He said, what are we doing here? And he said, we're just starting a conversation terribly, because we need to start it somewhere. And I do believe that in one of those, just pick which one you feel that you're almost lacking in the most. I think if you have an honest conversation with yourself it could just be a conversation, or it could be a form of prayer, or it could be meditation. You say, this is the thing I'm most anxious about, and the thing that I need to at least start in the worst way possible, and acknowledge for sure the imposter syndrome that you'll get from that. I still get it in writing all the time, and I'm still figuring it out, to be honest. And this is funny to say this, because I'm sure people that read my work will be like, oh, this guy seems like he knows what he's doing, or oh, I don't know what people think. I get comments, but you have to acknowledge that you will feel a form of imposter syndrome. This is the same thing that even David Goggins says. He says he's afraid to run almost every single day, because I'm sure deep down in his mind, he's like, well, I've done all this, but can I really still keep going? So I believe it's acknowledging your weakness and having an honest conversation, and then attacking it and doing a terrible job at it and being okay with that.
Yeah. And it's having the insight and self-awareness that these are my weaknesses. I need to level up on that. So, it's maxing out on one thing, but having a weakness. You're only as strong as your weakest link. So if something is lacking, you're always going to, they say you fall down to the level of your weakness. Therefore, strengthen that. And now, speaking about weaknesses, you wrote a book on mind and muscle. And I've seen you do calisthenics. You obviously run as well. And so for you, what was the hardest part of taking your body to the limit? Your body's capabilities, capacity. What was the hardest part Was it the ultra marathons? Was it the body weight training? Was it the resistance training? What because I saw one of your articles about how to build big legs, and sometimes that can be counterintuitive to ultra marathons. You want to have lean legs.
It is, yeah.
Then you want to bring. So, what's been the most challenging part for you in terms of the physical domain?
It definitely was, and once I let this concept go free, it really worked out. It was just push yourself in one thing only and see how good you could get at it. And this was during the pandemic when I really was running hard. Now I run, but not as crazy as 30 miles and 25 and 20 miles. But at that period, it was, let me just see how good I can get if I just dedicate to running. And I did working out too. But I would say it was once that concept kind of broke free, and I still was working, I still was making money. You need to, support yourself. It was a lot easier to just hold myself accountable. So, and I suggest it to every man, especially. See how good, just one thing you've been thinking about, and just see how good you could get at it if you just push yourself in that one direction. Because I believe that's what most of the people we look up to have done. People don't know the dirty work that people go through. Like when I would do stand-up comedy out in New York, there'd be comedians that would do sets like 5 or 6 sets a week, and other people would say, I did 1 set, I did 2 sets. It's like there are people that will push themselves, and that's what really rewards success. And it's not the easy answer, but it's the true answer, I believe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Pushing yourself, because you never know how good you are until you really do that. And I think a lot of men are scared of failure. Someone recently told me, you failed your way forward. Failure is just success in disguise. And whether that's failure in a rep when you're in the gym, or whether that's a failed blog post, you fail your way forward. There's no failure. Your first 10 minutes are going to suck. Your first 10 hours are going to suck. Your first 10 gym sessions are going to suck. But you failed your way forward. And now you've hit the dizzy heights of 5 million views, I believe, 27,000 subscribers on Medium. And so you said you still feel like an imposter. Now, is that less, or is that still quite frequent?
Hey, there's a great book on this too, Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art, where basically every day you just encounter resistance and that voice in the back of your head that tells you, like, what am I doing here? What's going on here? I would say it gets less as it goes on, but it's never something that completely goes away. Just because, to me, for running, especially running, and especially that time, even to answer your question before this, was the hardest part was that voice that's kind of telling you that, it's more so getting to that field. Everybody wants to get into the flow or the part where you're in mile 5 or 6 or 7 or you're feeling good. But to get there, those first initial steps are always so hard. And once you get there, you're like, oh, I can do this. I'm like super cool. I'm the best. Nobody can beat me. But it's always taking those first few steps where, like, before I start typing, I'm like, maybe I should just go watch like one more, we watch a lot of football analysis out here. So it's like, let me just watch one more clip or just procrastinate a little bit more. So it will always be hard to take that first step. I believe that's true for anybody.
Yeah. It's kind of decreasing the friction, I think, and just once the wheels, so to speak, are lubricated, things do get easier. Now, I know you like philosophy, Isaiah, so this is going to be a deep philosophical question based on what you just said there. So you said about this internal narrative, which is always there. It gets less, but it's always there. Now, as someone who's kind of read clinical psychology as a doctor, I talk about some of my podcast about the inner child. There's an inner child in us. Some people call it the inner chimp, the primitive brain, the limbic system. But I like to call it an inner child. That's you, as someone whose limbic system was very developed as a 5-year-old, but your frontal cortex wasn't as developed. So you've got this child which will always have doubts. And a lot of very successful people, we read about Kobe, read about a lot of Simon Sinek and Steve Jobs and all these guys who have excelled in multiple fields. They all had some form of therapy to heal this inner child. And for you, someone who's almost obsessed with mastery in multiple domains, I could say, have you had therapy, coaching to reparent this inner child, or was your childhood with your two teacher parents, was that sufficient and was that nurturing enough for you to become the man you are today?
That's definitely a deep question. It's really hard to say. When you talking about that, it did make me think again another Plato saying where he believed we knew everything before birth and life was just remembering and basically remembering what you knew before birth. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I believe I don't know if I feel I get that in a lot of other people, but I really believe that's the heart of me essentially, because I do think that especially when I pick up any new skill or anything, you teach myself anything, it feels like, oh, I feel like I'm a kid again. And this feels the kind of play. And even Carl Jung had a great saying about that, where he's the fool is a precursor to the savior. So it is like being a kid. And I don't know if I learned that really as a kid, I grew up in an army household. So it was very tight, and so I think you have to relearn what you didn't get in childhood. And a lot of people like to speak of, life's an internal journey, but it's also an external one. Like for me, I'm a writer, and a lot of the writers I really look up to, they have the same problem where it's how much time do I spend to writing and how much time do I spend to going out and living a life that I can write about, So I believe people need to figure that out too. And maybe that's a huge male crisis right now as well. Is like, don't think that everything, especially in this, I spend a lot of time out in California and everyone's like, oh, have an inward journey, go to Joshua Tree, do all this, spiritual. And it's like, all right, that's fine. But there's also a lot of encountering in the world you need to have. And all of this plays with your inner child, I would say. Anything that just feels risky and anxiety inducing.
Yeah. And it helps you as a writer as well, having that kind of let-off period where, it can circumvent writer's block. Just going for a long shower and Ayurvedic medicine and, meditation can really make the creative juices flow. And poets have done that for centuries and millennia even, like William Wordsworth was a famous English poet. And he wrote to the Lake District where he wrote his best poems. And same as Byron Shelley, Lord Byron, he would write some of his best poems when he'd been in a retreat. And sometimes that creative juice flows better when you do upload. Now for you, how do you, because, for you fitness is, you've got certain expectations or certain standards. How do you offload? Like, what's your decompression exercise?
Great answer. I try to not take the American philosophy of let's kill ourselves in the gym or let's kill ourselves every single time we do any kind of work. I believe I'm not sure. I heard some UFC coach who promoted this, and that's kind of been my philosophy for a while. It's just go to the gym and take it as like another spirit of play. Like I like to push myself every now and then, do some sprints on the treadmill, do some hill sprints, do heavy deadlifts or something else. But most of the time when I go there, I just try to, I don't treat it every time as an offload period, but I at least try to be with it and be like loose with it and not try to get to a point where I kill myself. The complete opposite of the Navy SEAL way of life. But that's the way at least it works for me nowadays, I would say. And I think that's a good way for anybody who's feeling stuck at any point in life, or especially the gym. It's like, just go and just try to like do a few things on there. Don't try to kill yourself every single time. Americans, I think we do get that backwards.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you start dreading it, and you do less sessions because you might be injured or you've got more load, and then your recovery increases. I think that was George St. Pierre's coach up in Montreal.
Yes.
Really, Faraz, I think his name is. He's got
him.
Very smart guy. He's been on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yeah, that's who I was talking
about. Training, derives from the Spartans in terms of, make your leisure, make your hard work like leisure almost. That's how that's how you enjoy it. Then you never have to work hard in your life because every day you're enjoying it and you're progressing. You've got to progress it over that, of course, just measured and managed. but it's not painful and punishing. And you mentioned a couple of minutes ago this having this inner child and nurturing the inner child. It's a very good book. I think it's by Carl Newport called So Good They Can't Ignore You, I believe. So Good They Can't Ignore You. That's the title, I believe. And it talks about Steve Martin, the comedian in the 70s and 80s.
Yes.
And how he was an average actor, an average comedian. But he worked so hard at his craft, he became Hollywood A-lister. Not from talent, but from sheer hard work. And his quote is, I became so good that they couldn't ignore me. The producers, the scriptwriters couldn't ignore me because I became so good. And Carl Newport uses the phrase craftsman's mentality. Be like a craftsman. Tell what that craftsman is, whether he's a shoesmith, a tailor, an ironmonger. Be like a craftsman. Just put in 10,000 hours and achieve mastery. And I think in today's day and age, Isaiah, many men just think, let me just become a good writer, or let me become a good athlete. And people actually Phil O'Neill are great examples. He's excelled in so many fields. Kobe Bryant, Dr. Dre, and Will Smith even. They've excelled in multiple fields. 50 Cent's a great example. He's actually a very good example. He's on.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Actor, producer, songwriter, and obviously a rapper as well. And goes on record label, going into boxing promotion. Why can't we excel in many fields? And I think this is the real tragedy of our time. And it goes back to your article you wrote about the man-child. The man-child loves comfort. He loves mediocrity. His mum puts a blanket on him. She never lets him push out. And it's causing, people to go to the graveyard with unfulfilled potential, and sadly making men go to the graveyard very early. You talked about suicide.
Yeah.
Robert Crumb's brother.
Yep.
And that's something which I'm passionate about, because last Monday in the UK was Mental Health Awareness Day, and it's the biggest killer of men under 45 in the UK and the West in general is suicide. How important is mental health awareness and is keeping on top of your mental health for you? Because physical health is one thing. How important is it to continuously fight the demons, make sure you never ever let your guard down for you?
Well, it's everything. I think it all starts completely in your head, and I think it's tough to say because a lot of demons that are problems, they might be genetic based or they might be just something you ran into in your development, but it's something that you take with you and you have to battle, I think, for your entire life. And yeah, it's not an easy thing. And I do really, it's funny because a lot of this, it's like we can harp on men, and I love it too because I'm like, yeah, it's true because we need to get our act together. But it's a tough world out there, and I'm starting to believe the worldview of like maybe you need to be your best man, your best self to even be able to interact with the world at all. Because there are a lot of times where I feel like even I'm just leaving something on the table, and not to be too hard on yourself, to never be too hard on yourself ever. But there's sometimes where I think I need to at least do. Live to my potential, do what I need to do. So it's a very, very, very tough. It's a tough answer, and I'm not even sure I have like the right answer for you because mental health it's so like ubiquitous and everywhere, and it's something that every man struggles with. And I can only hope that we talk to each other more and have don't let this. Because it's so, I know how easy, especially in New York. I would say the movie Taxi Driver. You can have days where you're just alone, nobody's seeing you, nothing's happening, you're in your own head, and everyone else is looking at you, and you just think everything's weird and not normal. And once you start talking to people, you realize that there's a lot. It's the one thing I learned in stand-up comedy, too. It's like, no matter the craziest thought you've had, it's like some people can relate to it. So. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, like Joe Rogan says, a lot of men live lives of quiet desperation. If you're a taxi driver in New York, you might not speak to anyone.
Nope.
Have this very platonic existence. You might be a single man, you might be widowed, recently bereaved, etc., and live this lonely existence. And men don't have that outlet normally that women do. And I think reading philosophy for me was a real game changer in changing my mind, and actually, especially reading Nietzsche. Reading Nietzsche made me realize that life is pain, and life is meant to be pain, and it's how you give meaning to that pain.
Mm-hmm.
Life is, even Van Gogh, some of his paintings, if you read some of the kind of 17th, 18th century German philosophers, it was all about life, existential philosophy. Life is meant to be painful, but the beauty lies in giving meaning to that pain. And then on top of that, you build from this existential philosophy with Stoicism. Stoics took it to another level, where they talked about pain is necessary for you to self-actualize. Because actually, without the pain, you can never get to the next level. And being in comfort is actually a disservice to you in the long run. And it's God's way of actually making you reach the new level. Do you read Stoic philosophy?
And I think
how important is it to you as a person?
Yeah, the one thing I have to say on that point you made is that the one thing that people should never, I think, misconstrue of Nietzsche is he wasn't a nihilist. He was an existentialist. He isn't saying life has no meaning, and he hated those kind of people. He didn't like people that said, it has. Yes, you can look at it like we're in a post God is dead world, but then you have to hopefully be able to build your own meaning system, or go to those traditional values and not just think that everything is completely meaningless. There's no point to anything. But the Stoics, I haven't actually read the Stoics too much. Actually, I've read bits and pieces here, but I know I would, in terms of other philosophers I've studied, like Marcus Aurelius, I've studied a little bit. And Epicurus a little bit too, but nothing enough that I'm comfortable to, talk about. But I do only because they're everywhere nowadays, the Stoics and their philosophy, that I feel like I've learned so much through them, through osmosis, that I haven't gone into them yet. But Nietzsche is someone who I would 100% recommend. He's not an easy read by any means. But he himself would say what you could write in a book, I can write in a paragraph. So I do believe that if you read just like 10 pages of Nietzsche, it might change your life. Yeah.
No, absolutely agree. And I think that qualifying remark you made, that it's not nihilism, which is just dark and gloomy. You don't want to be reading, the profound nihilistic philosophers. And Nietzsche also, he was existential. And I think a great addition to Nietzsche's work is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes.
It's a great, he wasn't a philosopher, he just had a horrendous life. But that book is a great work of philosophy, because it adds to Nietzsche's existential work, 200 years before him, which talked about existentialism and attaching meaning to that pain. Because you can read the life of a lot of these guys, and a lot of them followed very secular viewpoints, atheism, etc. But with existentialism, and then in Viktor Frankl's book, I think that every man should read that. And it's in the title, Man's Search for Meaning. It's in the title.
And I'll add one more. But I don't want to overbear. I've recommended so many books through this. I would recommend Dostoevsky. Personally, either The Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment. That book, I would, no matter all the recommendations we've made here, that one man has probably changed my life more than any person. Yeah. Any person living, any Navy SEAL, any person in the manosphere. He was the one that just told me, you might think you're above morality or these things or these traditions, but if you act that way, it could destroy your life, Yeah. And in Crime and Punishment, that happens when a character thinks, all right, I should murder someone and I can get away with it. And then he realizes, no, maybe other people, like, you're not a psychopath. Maybe other people can get away with this, but you are a person, that can't get away with it. And I think men need to especially understand that message.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Accountability. And that point, Isaiah, Jordan Peterson quotes him a lot. And he mentioned this in one of his talks.
Yes.
He says, look, you can, if 7 years ago you did something and now it's come back to bite you. But if you go back to each of the events, it was that initial misgiving that misdeed that you did, and in the butterfly effect, you'll never get away with it. The original
Yes.
sin, Cain and Abel, you'll never get away with it. It will always come back. And another one, Kafka, the Metamorphosis, great short novels about man's value, and quite weird. Admittedly, there's a lot of meaning behind the novels, and it's he was more of a novelist rather than a philosopher.
Which I think is important. I believe novels, as Peterson says, and the Greeks believe too, mythos over logos. The ancient Greeks would say they believed that myth had a deeper meaning and could reach a different aspect than straight nonfiction could.
Yeah, exactly, because you had the logos, the pathos, and the ethos, and mythos superseded that. And there's actually a very good audiobook by Stephen Fry. I think it is called Mythos. He's narrated some of the. He's got a really nice, deep, soothing voice, and he's narrated some of the old Greek tales in mythology. Hercules, who's the one that flies to the sun, falls down?
Oh, Icarus.
Sorry?
Icarus.
Yes, Icarus. Yeah, Icarus, and Achilles and Zeus, etc., etc. Some really powerful lessons, I think, and each of these has a deeper meaning. When you even like Prometheus and all these of man's kind of inherent transgression in wanting to play God and actually having that middle path, and not going too vain in your desires, and also not being so numb that you become apathetic and indifferent and ambivalent. Having that middle path, not transgressing at all. And I think some of the Greek works need to be revisited, and Penguin have done a very good book, Penguin Classics, they brought them back to life. But it's so important for men to actually revisit some of these old Greek philosophers and novelists, because like Isaac Newton says, we can only look further by standing on the shoulders of giants. These men were giants of our past. And it's a shame that men do not look at, these philosophers, these Stoics, novelists that have written so much work. Now, in terms of books, what's your all-time favorite three books? Now, these could be from the world of business, like Dave Goggins. They could be from the world of philosophy or world of financial literacy, like, Kiyosaki or Richest Man in Babylon. What are your three life-changing books that you will give to your son?
Definitely, as I said, Dostoevsky for sure. The Brothers Karamazov is my personal favorite. I personally think it's the best book ever written. It just goes a quick synopsis. It just goes. It almost predicts everything that's happening nowadays in a post God is dead world where you have no meaning, and what do you do about it? And that's basically it. That's the best kind of recommendation I give for that. I look at my library now and I'm like, what would I give my sons 100%? I think I would definitely do a lot of fiction. So I would go with my personal favorite writer who is in between fiction and nonfiction. I would go Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is a really weird random pick to throw out there. But Hunter, he just is able to... he's just able to live a life that I think a lot of men should also, not the drugs and the alcohol and the abuse and all that, but he just has a sense of adventure that it almost is, to me, it's like reading like Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn. It's like a modern adventure story, and men need to, I think, read more modern adventure stories and see that, hey, you can go out there and be crazy, and you have to read another person's life to do that. And I guess I'll throw nonfiction in there to wrap it all up. I'd go with either Something with Jung or by his protege, Eric Neumann. And I guess I'll go with Neumann. A lot of people don't know this book. It's called The Origins and History of Consciousness. The book, it's one of the greatest books I've ever read. It's a difficult book to read, but it's another book that, like we've been talking about this entire time, myth and symbolism is all around you. And you don't have to get to the point where you're drunk on symbols like Carl Jung was or how Jordan Peterson is to some extent. but when you make out the world, you're able to see, like reading that book made me realize, oh my God, the Lion King is an ancient Egyptian story, and realizing that there's so many ancient stories that are just shaping our world, and this is the reason why we connect to them. And when you realize, when you recognize the world or realize the world at a deeper level, in that sense, things make more sense, in my opinion. Like we said before, you build up a foundation, a trunk that can just help you support the rest of your life. So those are the three, but there's so many. But if I said those three, yeah. So 100 Psalms will be some for fun, and will like help it'll be a levity for the other two.
Well, great. It's a great list. It's broad. And I think going back to the third book, about being perspicacious and putting things together in a crazy post-modern world, a great book written about 50 years ago by Ken Weber called Through the Eye of the Spirit. Great book, one of the greatest kind of philosophers since Jung, you could say, psychologists as well. Great book. And then it goes back to what you said about symbolism and putting things together and just making order in a disordered world, having some kind of calmness in a chaotic world full of commotion.
Yes.
It's been great having you on. Any closing remarks at all?
No, I loved this interview. I would just say to anyone listening, start somewhere and start sloppy, and that's I think the ethos of a modern man nowadays is just start somewhere. And, that's really it.
And we hear this fake it till you make it. I always say wing it till you bring it.
I like that. I've never heard that before, actually. Wing it till you bring it.
Until you bring it. Because we're always going to get imposter syndrome. We're always going to get that. So may as well start.
Yes.
And get better with practice, having that craftsman mentality. And you've proven it, excelling in many fields and still learning. You're always going to be a student until we depart from this earth. And having that student mentality is so important. And I say, how can people find you?
Check me out on Medium. You can just search my name on Google, Isaiah McCall. It's ISAIAH. And look at my work. I'm starting a Substack, and hopefully we'll be having an audio and video format of my own. But if not, I'd just love to have more, honest and insightful conversations like the ones, we're having with other people across the internet and just connecting more. So just look me up there, and that's about it for now.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I'll love to speak to you again, maybe in New York and I'm there.
Will do.
Thank you.